Hello, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheely here again, back for another episode of the History of Comics podcast, this time part 3 of the life of Joe Kubert. When we last left off, Joe Kubert has ensconced himself into his work at DC, helping establish the classic Sergeant Rock character along with his classic war line, and he would continue to do so, along with going on with new ventures into the comic book medium. During this time, comic books had started becoming a family business when Joe Kubert's son Adam started to work as a letterer at the age of 12. However, Joe's professional life took a strange twist as editor when he had to reject his idol, Lou Fine, for cover art, despite having pursued him for years to do so. When the pieces arrived on Kubert's desk, he realized that years as a commercial artist had made Fine's art gorgeous, but also static, just not much of a storyteller. Kubert was able to recruit John Costanza, his letterer from the Tales from the Green Beret comic strip, and Sergio Aragones, the famous Spanish-born artist whose English skills were marginal at the time, but was able to provide some single-panel humor features for the DC war books. Working with Joe Kubert, Aragones would call him the most organic artist he'd ever seen, never knowing where his lines began or end, they were so fluid. Sadly, Joe's father, Jack, was diagnosed with lung cancer, being a smoker his entire life, but chose to forego treatment, despite doctors telling him the operation to remove the cancerous growth from his lungs would be fairly standard. He has since chosen to become a jeweler, now living in Florida. A giant opportunity did fall into Joe Kubert's professional life, though, when DC acquired the rights to Edgar Rice Burroughs' estate, with Carmen Infantino personally telling his old friend, Joe Kubert, that they wanted him to pencil Tarzan. Kubert was thrilled, as Tarzan was always his favorite fictional character, having heavily influenced his own Thor, so for him, it was a chance of a lifetime. Fans were immediately excited as well, believing the creator Thor would be perfect for the King of the Jungle. Kubert started with a 4-part Tarzan and the Apes, the introductory story of Tarzan that gave his origin of being raised by apes in the African jungle. Kubert's work totaled 73 pages while homaging Hal Foster's original classic run, though it did take away from his work on DC's war comics. He also worked with Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated, ERB, and Hobart Burroughs, Edgar's son, who loved Kubert's work with minor objections, for example, saying that apes don't have claws. Kubert did get a new editorial assistant, Marv Wolfman, in 1972, after he left the career as a teacher. It would prove to be a wise career choice, Mr. Wolfman. The series even kept up Gold Key's numbering, the original comic book that ran the series, starting at number 207 on February 1972. Even further, they used photostats of the old strip for issues number 211, though it was mostly meant to save money. Later, Joe Kubert produced one-shots in the story The Return of Tarzan, along with producing covers for other Edgar Rice Burroughs property, such as Korak, the son of Tarzan, Tarzan the Lion Man, would be his third adaptation, though the series would eventually end over budget constraints. Nevertheless, the Tarzan fans were so impressed they honored Joe Kubert at the Bureau of Bibliophiles annual meeting in 1974 at the 32nd annual Worldcon on September 1st, where he was presented with the Golden Lion Award. In his acceptance speech, he thanked the fans and gave tribute to Hal Foster for setting the standard for Tarzan comics. Kubert continued to work on the Tarzan comics, adapting 2 more novels, Tarzan and the Castaways and The Jungle Murderers. By Tarzan number 250 in June of 1976, Joe Orlando was made editor, though by this point DC's 5-year contract with ERB had ended, who now moved over to Marvel. Nevertheless, Kubert's run on Tarzan remains a highlight of the series, with many calling it equal to Hal Foster's original, if not superior. Kubert continued with his comic book work, along with engaging in interviews. In one for Amazing Heroes, number 34, in November of 1983, Kubert said he drew just enough so readers could fill in the blanks between the panels. Meanwhile, Kubert decided to dust off his old Thor creation once again with Al Delaney's, a longtime fan and producer of the fanzine Near Mint. Delaney's agreed to help reproduce them, being such a fan that he would copy Kubert's art in ink just for fun, and when Kubert saw his Thor samples, he thought he would be ideal for repackaging Thor in book form. Kubert even used his old art from the defunct Thor newspaper strip, which Carmen Infantino helped write. Though it was ultimately shoddy work, as Delaney was a dedicated fan, he was still an amateur artist at best. Meanwhile, Kubert did layouts for Sheldon Mayer's Old Testament series, a special Treasury edition released in 1975, with Nestor Redondo doing the finished pencils and inks, while also returning to his editorial duties over DC War Comics line. This did result in him letting go of Russ Heath, a talented perennial late artist who clashed with a true professional like Joe Kubert, who stated that a deadline is a deadline. He also found himself rejecting stories from the equally talented Alex Toth, who would change the story too much from Robert Canary's scripts. While Kubert, being a talented artist himself, trusted artists to make small changes since they were the storytellers in their own right, Toth was changing the stories completely to the point that Kubert had to reject the pencils outright. Reportedly, Toth would just throw those pages in his trunk where they would eventually be damaged by moisture. Sadly, tragedy struck when Joe Kubert's father died at the age of 81 in June of 1975, with his mother Etta dying just a few years later. As a result, Joe Kubert, being the eldest son at 48, became the head of the family, and as a de facto elder, he soon began pondering how he could pass on his knowledge to the younger generation. It would revive a decades-old plan, and perhaps be one of his greatest contributions to the comic book medium. In June of 1976, the Buyer's Guide of Comic Fandom, Joe Kubert made a new step in his professional life when he announced in Inkblot's column page his intention of opening a comic book artist school. It will be housed in a beautiful mansion in Dover, New Jersey, according to the article by Howard Lucy Davis. Its name would be Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art, Incorporated. It was designed as a 2-year intensive studies school for telegraphics. Kubert coined the term for telling a story through picture illustration, similar to how Will Eisner also called the comic books sequential art. The ad highlighted 22 professional cartoonists who would teach there, from Will Eisner to Gil Kane. This was part of Kubert's larger plan for the comic book medium in general, as he felt the industry was still strong, despite others being pessimistic, though it was changing, with an emphasis on merchandise and adaptations, such as Superman the movie and the Incredible Hulk TV show at the time. During this time, Kubert was also approached by Stan Lee to work at Marvel, but turned him down when he learned someone else would ink his pencils. He always insisted on doing it himself, while Lee preferred someone else to ink over Kubert. The Kuberts also traveled to Europe in 1973 to the convention in Lucca, Italy. There, Joe Kubert met Sergio Bonelli, a major European publisher, and Irvin Rushmagic, who had just launched Strip Art Features, SAF, the previous year. And these two figures would play a large role in Kubert's career years later. While in Kubert, Joe was happy to discover his work was popular and that Europeans didn't look down on comic books like kid stuff in America, and encouraged Joe to develop a character just for that market, which would become Abraham Stone, a revenge story set in the early 20th century with the intention of Rushmagic's SAF marketing it. However, the demands of his new school forced him to put it on hold for now. The idea that his school went back to his apprenticeship at Harry Chesler's studio, believing the instruction he received there should be replicated in a school setting. He even tried it previously at one point in 1954 with the Comics Illustrator Instructions course with Norman Maurer, but he had to be canceled when the 3D comic books market fell out. However, during the 1960s and 70s, when fans would bring portfolios of their work, Kubert was unimpressed with their lack of basic knowledge and felt instruction was needed. Now Joe Kubert was finally going to put this idea to fruition, with its site picked at 45 Lehigh Street called the Baker Mansion, whose lineage could be traced back to 1630 from the Baker family. Their name dotted across Dover, New Jersey, from Baker Avenue to the Baker Opera House. Situated on 7 acres, it had 3 floors in the basement, along with a carriage house and a swimming pool. The Kuberts especially liked it for the dormitory space, and it would soon become a personal place for their family as well, as their daughter Lisa would be married there in 1983, the first of their children to do so. Muriel helped plan the school, and after decades of being a homemaker, was glad to get out of the house, being a highly intelligent woman with a college degree. It helped that their youngest children, Adam and Andy, were teenagers now and much more independent. Joe Kubert hired Irvin Hassan, an old friend from his DC days in the 1940s, and Hy Eisman, a more recent acquaintance from his work in American Comics Group and Gold Key, as regular instructors. Eisman was initially hesitant, having never taught there before, but the casual setting of the school, such as not having to shave on a regular basis, along with the needs of students, many never even heard of a dip pen, for example, encouraged them. He eventually specialized in lettering at the school, partly because no one else wanted to do it. Joe Kubert's school, JKS for short, had a first class of 22 students, including Steve Bissett, and he and his fellow students would later be called Cubies. Bissett's father, Richard, was discouraged by his son's chosen line of work, having served in all 4 branches of the military and launched 2 successful businesses. However, in support of his son, he drove 7 hours to the school where he met and was immediately impressed by Joe Kubert. The two immediately bonded over their past military service, and Richard Bressett was extremely impressed that Joe Kubert had a large family that he supported with his comic book career. Simply put, Joe Kubert was a living, breathing advertisement for his school. This would be one of the perks of the school for the students as well, as Kubert would teach at the school and evaluate their work in person. The coursework was extremely demanding, as Joe Kubert believed in learning through work, as it was also taught by actual professionals, such as Dick Giorgiano, Lee Ellis, and so forth. Though students noticed they hadn't taught much before, the real-world knowledge was the main appeal. Kubert himself emphasized storytelling and composition, along with the importance of meeting a deadline. Kubert believed in tough love and felt that letting the students off easy would be a waste of their money. Kubert would later state in 2003 that the school's philosophy was to give students the skills to become professional comic book artists and thus the ability to make a living doing what they loved. It was intense work, with students drawing 8 to 10 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, but Kubert was proud to be able to claim 80 to 90% of JKS's graduates got jobs in the comic book field, with such notable alumni as Amanda Conner and Alex Maleev. Joe Kubert also pursued a mail-order series through Alter Ego, but that fell through. He also tried to create a tabloid that was a collection of newspaper strips from various artists called Sojourn, which was inspired by his past attempt with Artists and Writers Syndicate back in the 1960s, which now also never came together. Kubert did produce a 2-page spread for Taurus Return in Sojourn number 1 in September 1977, but it only lasted for one issue. In the fall of 1978, the Kubert School expanded from 2 years to 3 of his years of instruction, as the 2-year length was considered too intensive. During this time, he also reconnected with his old boss and mentor, Harry Chesler, having done a tribute for him back in 1976 for the fanzine Manticore. It turns out Chesler has since gone into real estate and become a millionaire, but Kubert noted he still used half-price coupons at restaurants, ever the cheapskate. Kubert still had great love for the man who gave him his first job in comics and even threw him a party in his honor at the school. Chesler would die a few years later in 1981, and an oil painting of him by Jack Binder still hangs in the Joe Kubert School in his honor. Joe Kubert's son started to get more into the comic book business as well, with Adam lettering of Detective Comics number 500 with the story The Strange Death of Dr. Erdell, which was penciled by his father and written by Paul Levitz, along with representing Joe Kubert's return to the Hawkman stories. However, Adam Kubert was not even a student at Kubert School yet. He had instruction from his father since he was a kid, allowing him to earn money helping him with lettering and word balloons in his work. However, Adam was only a casual comic book fan starting out, and originally graduated with a degree from the Medical Illustration at Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, but decided to try comic books instead afterwards. Thus, he started work at JKS in the fall of 1981 with his brother Andy. Andy previously took classes at Morris County Vo-Tech, which awakened his interest in art, and also taught classes at RIT, specializing in packaging design. Hy Eisman said he was the most hopeless first-year student at JKS, but he eventually got by. To help inspire his son, Joe Kubert showed Andy classic comic books, such as Comic Book Guide with Hal Foster and Alex Raymond, to get him motivated. Meanwhile, Joe soon found the school taking up more and more of his time that he had to do comic book work at the school. He originally hoped to let someone else handle the administrative side while just teaching one class a week, but that soon wasn't the case. Finally, Kubert moved his studio into the school itself so he could work. On August of 1982, Joe Kubert was interviewed in the Spirit Quarterly by Will Eisner, where the two discussed art and writing and how they used photos for references but not tracing. To both, tracing was just swiping an image, while referencing photos was used to inspire your drawings but still making your own image. It was also renewed Kubert and Eisner's friendship, as they hadn't seen each other in years. While Eisner did get Joe Kubert interested in doing graphic novels after Eisner's success with A Contract with God. In 1983, The Redeemer was announced at DC, described in Amazing Heroes number 34 for 12 issues as a maxi series. Limited series ran for 4 to 6 issues most of the time. The story was to be about Jim Torkin, who was constantly reincarnated in his battle with the Infernal One. However, Joe Kubert was editing 10 books at a time, thus it was never published, though he did produce at least 4 of the comics. Despite having never released them, DC never asked for the royalties they paid Kubert in advance for it, but he decided he wanted it owned and outright, so he paid DC back anyway. Graphic novels were on hold for now, but like many of Joe Kubert's ideas, he would eventually get back to them. With the JKS school expanding, the Kuberts bought the Dover High School, which had 100,000 square feet, 35 classrooms, a gym, and a 600-seat stadium.